Douglas Horn. I'm the white paper author from Telos. Telos is a new blockchain that's launching soon. We are based on the EOSIO software, and the same as EOS, and with several improvements. And those improvements are range from code improvements like inverse weighted voting and rotating BPs and a few other things, to governance improvements like the fact that we will elect our arbitrators, and some other very large code changes. For example, we, instead of having a constitution that is broadly defined in principles, we have a very detailed Telos network operating agreement that we are putting together that is much more boring, but actually helps people understand how the how the network is going to work. So those are some of the differences. But what we're really trying to do is create, and there's also tokenomic differences where we cap large accounts at 40,000 tokens, so that we retain a large voice for people who've given a lot to EOS. But in our launching Telos, we feel it's important to be able to give everyone a vote. And one of the effects of having hyper concentrated voting on EOS is that really 99.3% of people have no effective, meaningful vote in the system, which we felt was not a recipe for success in a system that depends on voting. So because this is a 100% community-led effort where no funds were ever sought or taken from anybody, except for the contributors themselves, such as my company, Goodblock, and EOS Detroit, and EOS UK, and a number of other contributors. We felt that we could give out new tokens on Telos in the way that best suited the health of the network. And so that's what we've done. And this is, so I'm very happy that EOS Talks was able to set this up and allow us to, and that PowerPix is hosting this and allowing us to talk to everybody and do sort of an Ask Me Anything style hangout. So that's what we're here to do.
Awesome. One of the things that even myself that I want to ask, and this is some of the changes that you've actually put into Telos, and has to do with the inverse weighted voting and also the rotation of the block producers, which is something that kind of keep people engaged in the I guess the network itself. I wouldn't call it a platform, but in the network itself. Could you get into a little bit of detail as far as how those changes will affect Telos versus EOS Core?
Yeah, I would love to, actually. Thank you. That's a great place to start. We're very, very proud of these functions because this is really the first time that anyone other than Block One has dug into the core EOSIO code and not just changed a few little things here and there, but actually innovated, created whole new swaths of code that change in a very meaningful way how the network is operated. So these first, and we have actually several of these coming up, but these are two that we've done. You can look at them in the GitHub. We've proposed that EOS consider them because they actually could solve some problems that EOS is facing. So the first one you mentioned is inverse weighted voting. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. On EOS, people, of course, there's a lot of money to be made by being a block producer, and 1% inflation shared amongst a number. It turns out to be a nice figure, right? That is decided by voting, and there's some very large token holders who are voting for just one or two BP candidates that they're affiliated with. And the intent from the start was always to be able to, there's a reason you can vote for 30. And the intent is to get people, and we've had a lot of talks, the intent is to get people to vote for a large number of BPs. I think we've kind of universally agreed that that is better for the health of the network. But for me, there's actually, I believe that people will do what they're actually incentivized to do. And if you happen to be someone who's affiliated with, if you happen to be a large token holder that's affiliated with a BP, your actual incentive is not to vote for 30, but just to vote for 1. Because even though the exact same weight is given to a vote, no matter how, whether you vote for 1 or vote for 30, what effectively happens is if you have 10 million tokens, the weight, you're actually able to weight votes for the people for the block producers you are voting for by withholding those from 29 others and only assigning them to yourself. Also, something that happens is people who are voting for larger numbers of BP candidates. There have been cases where they will game the payment system, the claim reward system, which we've also rewritten in Telos, in a way that they actually can unvote for everybody else just before they execute claim rewards, and game the system to get a little bit more pay at the expense of others who would arguably deserve that for having done the job. So those are things that we thought were just base unfair, and where the way the code was designed did not match the incentive that we were trying to create. So we took a look at these and we said, how can we actually make the code match what we all say we want, which is to have people vote for a lot of block producer candidates. And the way we did that is we said, well, what if there is a way to say you can vote for as many as you want, but if you're voting for a small number, then either you're gaming the system in the way I just described, or you just haven't educated yourself very much, in which case you could educate yourself more or go find a nice proxy who you basically believe in and proxy your votes to them. If you don't vote a lot, maybe your vote doesn't have as much weight. And since we're already weighting votes on the system by the amount of tokens people own, which is fine and built in, we feel that that we could take this approach and inversely weight them so that any voter who votes for fewer than the full amount is not getting the full amount of their weight. And basically the way this is set up is, if you vote for 1, 2, or 3, your votes count for very, very little. If you vote for 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, your votes count for essentially the full amount. And then there's a slope between those. And in all things that we're doing in the code, we actually parameterize that and make it very clear in the code what each of those parameters are, so that we as a group in Telos can vote to change it easily in the future. And anyone who forks the Telos code and takes advantage of all the work that's being done by our group to enable a multi-chain future can also easily choose what tokenomics are best for them. So that is inverse weighted voting. And maybe I'll pause there, and we can definitely come back to rotate BPs. Maybe you have some follow-up questions on that first.
As far as inverse weighting, no, but even once we get into the rotating BPs, kind of these things go hand in hand with each other. And I know maybe after you're done talking about the rotating BPs, there's always that topic that comes up, I know, in EOS Talk, when we talk about different platforms and all, anything that has either witness or block producers, kind of a topic we always bring up is like term limits. So I didn't know if down the road, if Telos ever had any ideas or plans about term limits, or if the way this is now being set up with this inverse weighted voting for BPs and for the rotation of BPs themselves, if that would kind of negate the necessity of having term limits.
Well, so there are currently, great questions. There's currently no plan for term limits. Any member we are not going to launch Telos until we have a certain a full checklist of things, which you can find at Telos Foundation launch. And that's it. We have to have all green check marks on all those things. And one of those that's very big is ratify. So the minute the network launches and activates, people are going to be able to suggest things like this, and probably there'll be a lot of them. I think that's entirely within the power of the electorate to suggest and vote for, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to empower their votes. Right, what Telos becomes is going to be a reflection of what the members engaging in it want it to become. And not to poke at EOS too much, but I think that's a key difference, right? Because there are a lot of things. The ability to have everyone's vote matter means that Telos as a network can be a lot more responsive to the desires and political ideas of all its members, as opposed to just less than 1% that have controlling votes on EOS. So if term limits are something that people want, they can propose it, amend it, and it could go to the contract, in I think it's 5 million blocks to ratify something. So which is like which is like a month, or maybe 10 million blocks. Anyway, in a month or two, they can ratify something. So it's, I don't know personally if I personally think that as long as you have an effective way for people to vote and communicate with their block producers and arbitrators, right? Because we also are going to be voting for our arbitrators. I think there's a benefit to institutional knowledge, but I don't think that I agree with the general sentiment that you don't want to get an entrenched class of block producers that don't allow anyone else in. And we're going to fight that in as many ways as we can. And maybe term limits are a way to do that. I don't know. It's not something we've discussed yet. But we can discuss it. The electorate can discuss it. I think it's important. Going to rotation. So the way rotate BPs works, it does two things. The first is already working, and you can see this on the testnet. If you go to testnet.telosfoundation.io, you can see there's a list of the what is it, like 34 producers right now. Currently only 29. I think a few got pulled down that weren't producing. Okay, so if you look at the 29 that are up right now, you'll see there's a green dot by some of them that are producing. And actually, it's not happening right now because there is a new schedule being proposed. If you look at it, it says new schedule pending, empty rotation table. That's just a brief period we happen to be in. But typically, you'll see a green dot and a gray dot, and the gray dot marks a top 21 producer that's being temporarily rotated out, and the green dot signifies a standby producer that's currently being rotated in. And what that does is it allows us to regularly test that all these standby BPs that we are paying, and we are paying much better on Telos than EOS, that they are actually able to do the job, right? So right now, EOS has 21 block producers and a large number, maybe in the around 60 standby block producers. And the concern I have is no one's really testing. There's no method for testing those standbys. And so not a lot of people are aware of this, but you could get a 2-year-old laptop as long as it had 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you could load it up with Node.eos and include the producer plugin and hook it up to the internet and have it report that it was ready for duty. But it doesn't. But if it ever had to actually do the duty, it would fail, right? And there are, I don't want to accuse anyone, but I suspect strongly that there are a lot of people who are getting paid on EOS who are in that condition where it doesn't make sense for them to be able to step in immediately. Perhaps they're on a cloud server and they've degraded their service. Since no one can check and no one tests them, it's essentially a waste of money for them to dedicate services to having top-notch gear that could step in at a moment's notice, and they would be wiser to dedicate that to social media or marketing efforts to try to get more votes, right? And then, should they get that, then rapidly catch up. Well, then if that's the case, and it likely is, what is the point of paying those people? And worse, what is the point of relying on them? I mean, the idea of standbys is that if the main ones went down for some reason, the standbys could quickly step in, and the network would not have to pause or have any problems. So without testing that, you don't know if that's true. The way we decided to approach this on Telos is we said, let's take 21 block producers is a good number because it keeps our last irreversible block at the same level as EOS. And let's have 30, which is probably more than we need, frankly. I think we could easily get by with about 15 or 20, but let's get 30 so we have a very robust, resilient amount. Let's pay everyone a good amount. So what we do is we pay all the block producers, or actually in the top 21, we pay them an equal rate, whether they receive the most votes or the 21st most votes. And then we take all the 30 block producers, standby block producers, and we pay them half that rate. So the idea is we ensure that we provide a reward for everybody who is actually winning and doing the block producing, right? Because that's a higher standard. But we pay enough to all the standbys that they can keep their equipment and their staffing and everything at a level where they can actually indeed do the job they're being paid to do, which is to step in at a moment's notice. So to ensure this, we created a new rotation device, a new rotation function, which actually, if you talk to a lot of people who understand EOS, the EOS software, we've gotten a lot of little pats on the back for this because everyone recognizes it's not easy. So, but it's working great. This proposes a schedule. It makes sure that generally, aside from a few edge cases that happen once in a while, all the standby block producers will be tested every 5 days, and all the main block producers will be given a chance to step out of rotation every 7 days for a little bit longer, so that they can, in case they need to service their equipment, they don't have to actually pull it down and disrupt the network. So that's constantly happening. We will move to a time where we actually penalize block producers for missed blocks. Right now, we're not probably going to do that by launch, and the reason is not because we can't do it, although it does present challenges. The main reason is it turns out that a lot of times, if you're not producing blocks, it may not be your actual fault. It may be a result of actions that happened upstream from you, like the last producer. So before we start penalizing people, we're going to better understand that. But it doesn't change the fact that the voters can see who can produce and who cannot produce, and vote out people that are not actually doing the job. So the other thing that's great about Rotate BPs that we are in the process of enabling now, of programming now, we haven't implemented yet on the testnet, but we will soon, is that if a block producer fails to produce for 30 minutes, then since we have this system where we can rotate people in and out, we simply rotate them out, right? On EOS, if somebody fails to produce, for 30 minutes, then people start talking, but nothing actually happens for 3 to 24 hours. And then there's no defined system for saying, hey, we got to do something about this. It's just a bunch of block producers talk, and eventually maybe they pull them off. Meanwhile, others could be possibly going down, right? And if we get to a situation where we ever get to 15 or below, we need to pause the network, or the network will simply pause and get into a locked up state. So we need to avoid that, and one of the ways to avoid that is by not letting your block producers go 24 hours without producing. So on Telos, we rotate them out since we have this nice rotation thing mechanism, and we don't make a big deal of it. I mean, sure, if somebody's constantly being rotated out for failure to produce, I think the voters will notice. But let's be honest, networks have parts that go down from time to time. That's why there's 21 block producers instead of 2, right? So why pretend that doesn't happen, that's not just a part of running a high-powered network? So what we do is we say, look, these things go down. Instead of making a big deal about it, we just have a resilient system that will find this situation, rotate somebody else in. We know that all the other people are regularly tested and can rotate in. And we let the block producer who's not producing rotate out for a nice chunk of time so they can fix it. Nobody has to drive at breakneck speeds to the data center or anything. The network continues and there's no problem. So, and that's really the way it should be. People shouldn't have to constantly panic about somebody going down or something not working. Good network is one that can weather these minor problems that happen from time to time without anybody ever really noticing or without hurting the network security. So that's what we're trying to develop with Rotate BPs.
Now, on your development schedule for your launch progress that you're checking off, because I know we're waiting for September 28th is going to be the go, no go. At least that's what it's planned for. What other kind of big changes are in the pipe that need to be still settled out before that, the 28th?
Oh, there's a lot. So let's go real quick to, I'm going to do this, to telosfoundation.io /launch. So if you look at this is our launch prerequisites checklist. These are all the things we said, we are going to do this. We will not launch until we have these, right? So there's development and code section, there's governance, there's contracts, right? Which is kind of the union between governance and code development. There's tools and there's some miscellaneous things, right? So we will absolutely have a vote on September 28th, and I expect it will absolutely not be a surprise to anyone what that vote is, because if it's working properly, somebody should be able to go to this on an hour before the vote and say, okay, check, all green checks. I bet you anything they're going to vote to launch the network, or they're going to go, hey, there's about 85% green checks and about 10% yellow dots and about 5% red circles. They're not gonna vote to launch it, right? It should come, and if we do vote to launch it under those types of circumstances, then we would be wrong to do it. We would be lying. So this is not one of those situations where there's like the countdown. So it's not the NASA launch where there's like a countdown and when you hit 0, you push the button and go. It's like one of those. It's like a real NASA launch where you say, communication systems, check. Life support, check. flight plan, check, right? You're actually going through each of the systems, determining if it is ready or if there's a reason to wait, before you ever really get to this whole before you ever get this countdown scenario. So that it's not going to be a surprise. So we can talk about each of these if you like. The first section is development code. There's a number here. I don't know if you really want me to go through each of them. And this list went up yesterday, so it's possible that it will get refined. I think it's a pretty good list. But one of the reasons we put this up now is so that anyone who's out there in the community can say, hold on, wait a second, you guys promised X and I do not see X on this list. And we can go, oh yeah, well, we better add that. Or we can say, or we can explain why X is still important or not important, or how it will be addressed. But we went to in all of our documentation, in all of our governance documents and everything, we are opting to put out bad versions early rather than wait for perfect versions, because we believe that there's no such thing as a perfect version until the community has a chance to weigh in and be heard and influence the life of them. Right? We are the group of people. Right? We are the 90%, or we're the 10% who are contributing and making changes, or the one, or that whole 1% 99% rule of the internet, where 1% of the people do most of the work on any given site and contributions, and 99% view it. That's a untested internet trope, but sometimes it feels true. Anyway, we're trying to get it out so that the people who want to contribute and want to comment and want to help improve it can have a say, so that we can make these documents better. So this is not perfect. Nothing we put out is going to be perfect the day we put it out, but I think it's pretty good. This is a list you can look at. There's some green checks. There's a lot of red. There's some stuff kind of blinking yellow. And the goal is to get all of these things green and launch the network.
I know when EOS had first come out, there's a lot of criticism about not having its own wallet and internal voting system and stuff. And I see that that's already on your tool sections, already got to orange. So, I mean, that's coming along. So I know a lot of what Telos is kind of correcting for either the mistakes or the things that were overlooked when EOS launched. What other things along those lines is Telos focused on to make it different than EOS when it first launches, as far as preparation?
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. So look, I always like to say that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We got the chance to already look at and participate in the launching of EOS, of the EOS network. And there are things that probably could have been done better. And we don't make these changes to, stick a thumb in the eye of EOS or anything, but we would be foolish to know that these things could have been done better and not take that historical lesson, right? So we owe a lot to the EOS launch, which almost all of us, at least the early contributors in Telos, actually participated in that, right? So any problems that are there are my fault as much as any problems with EOS launch are our fault as much as anybody's, right? We bear responsibility for launching a network that was missing some pieces. And, thinking back to those days, everyone just wanted EOS to launch. We couldn't wait. There were very few people who were saying anything about, we can't, this isn't ready and that's not ready. Those things came up, but they just weren't the majority of voices. I remember there was a time there was the go no go before the unanimous go no vote, go no go vote on EOS, where there was some questions because there was a new thing found, and people asked why we were voting no, and I voted no at that point because we had an explanation for what this would how this would work, but we had no testing, right? And the community like was up in, not the whole community, but some vocal people in the community on the internet, which could be, one guy with 7 accounts, who knows? Some people were very up in arms about the fact that we voted no go. So I think there was really very little discussion of do we need all these pieces. Then, of course, we went through the actual voting. We went through actual network activation and the early stages. And we found that these things that we were going to get to later were actually really important. Things like the ability to ratify or amend the governance documents, right? There's still, people are working on that all these months later, but there's no way quite to do that yet. And it's not really a good way to, it limits, it hamstrings the network to not be able to have those pieces. Another thing is, the arbitration was, whatever you think of the ECAF, and what in its legitimacy, it was new, right? It was new to people. It had not been much discussed. These are people who were appointed. My hat is off to them because I know that their people there worked very hard, and I don't know if any of them have been paid at all for that yet. But setting up something that's not well vetted, and where the community does not have a voice and a chance to do, where they feel like they don't have a chance to influence that, and then not having any way to pay for the hard work of all the people who have to come together and try to set this up and build a workable network. It's a recipe for bad feelings, and I think that's what you see, right? What we wanted to do is look at that and say, okay, we need a way, number one, for people to, we need a well described system of arbitration. We believe that if you can entrust block producers to run the executive side of the network, then you should equally be able to, if you can trust the electorate, the token holders, to vote for the block producers who run the network, then there's no reason that you shouldn't also be able to vote, trust them to vote for the arbitrators. And in both cases, the block producer and the arbitrators both sign a human language contract when they nominate themselves that explicitly says what they can and can't do, and what the penalties for breaking those representations are, and how those are enforced. And also there's minimum requirements. So in that context, we think that the very best way to have arbitrators and arbitration is to vote for them. So we set that up, and we are soon going to be able to list a number of candidates who are actual legal professionals, hopefully from several countries, who are like stepping on to take this journey with us and try to bring the judgment and background of actual legal professionals, and a broader number of them, into arbitration. And then the third part of that, for example, is we needed a way to pay these people to get them in, to make sure that that in the very beginning we can bootstrap this. Talk to Thomas Cox and a few others, and who point out rightly that you need a way to. It's hard to bootstrap payment. It's hard if it comes from BPs, because there's a worry about whether that makes the arbitrators beholden to BPs in future cases that may arise. And so we said we need a distinct organization that's going to be able to pay for bootstrapping of things, even if it's just for initially for a month, when the worker proposal system, while it's going to be started, it still takes a month to vote for a worker proposal system. So we created that was one of the main reasons why we created the Telos Foundation, so that we would have a little endowment there, so that we could do things like get some money into the arbitration system right away. Other things we want to do with that money is vote to reinstate the dust accounts, which are accounts that existed on the EOS snapshot, but there were less than one EOS and more than 0.1 EOS. And there's some contention about whether those should have been included or not. It'll cost 8,000 Telos approximately to reinstate those up to one Telos. There's around 16,000 of those accounts. And although it's a small gesture, we feel those people expended resources, and that they also deserve to be included at the launch of the Telos network. So we can't do that we've elected not to do that in the with the snapshot, and instead to use separate funds to bring those accounts back. So those come out of the Telos Foundation. Another thing is we've talked about the need to and the good for the network to make to have a way to pay for the first 1 million new accounts, and that's going to come out of the Telos network. So by having a small endowment there or an endowment that is able to kick out some money right away before anything could go through the worker proposal system, it means that people don't have to work hard for a month without any solid promise of being funded, as the very, I'm sure, very dedicated people of the ECAF had for maybe 3 months now. So those are just some of the pieces. There's a lot of little pieces, right? We are promising to, because we have a very fortuitous window, we are promising to do everything we can to get people's lost and stolen keys, lost and compromised keys, I should say, rekeyed, so that they don't have to be, they don't have to miss out on two networks, right? They can get their keys set up before we lock in the actual Genesis snapshot. So there's a lot of little things that we can do that are good, and we have promised to, and so we're not going to launch until we feel we have met our promises.
Okay. Now, I have two other kind of topics myself that I want to touch on that I know comes across a lot in the different telegrams. The first one would be, we saw the kind of RAM market issues that happened with EOS Core, and what that meant as far as different dApps trying to be created, and like you had touched on just now about account creations and things that was kind of restricting things. And then we saw a lot of actual dApps that were going to be on EOS just take the code and fork it, and they have their own EOSIO chain for their dApps standalone. How does Telos kind of correct for some of that and make a more stable environment with regards to RAM markets or account creation and things like that?
Great question, because that really is an existential issue for Telos and EOS. Really, is let's acknowledge the fact that the whole reason to have a blockchain like this is for dApps to be deployed on it, right? I mean, it's all nice that we have a way that we can send messages and things like that and create value, but really, if dApps aren't deployed and don't find an audience, then this is really, it's not for anything, right? This is the point. And so I actually think it's a loss for all participants when a big dApp decides to fork off the code and go on their own, including for them. and it's a loss for EOS, right? The network, or Telos. It's a loss. It's a loss for the networks that are there and that exist exactly for the reason of supporting those dApps, right? It's a loss for the token owners who are sort of relying on these things being deployed to give not only ongoing value to the token, but also something to use their tokens with, right? We want these. We don't want to have to necessarily go on to another blockchain. And then it's actually a huge loss for the company that does this, right? Because a dApp should be concentrating on getting their dApp right, not getting their dApp right and their blockchain right. Total waste of their effort. Some are big enough or have very specific needs where it makes sense. But in general, for anything that can be considered broadly any kind of general use app, having to create their own blockchain is just a huge additional task that takes them away from what they really should be doing. And it's a signal that the blockchains themselves are not delivering on the promise, right? And we can't have that keep going on. But they're doing it for good reason, right? They're doing it largely because they can't go in there and never know what their costs are going to be, right? So it's an expression of a failure to create a cost-effective deployment network. So, and I want to point out, like, I know that people think that Telos is, trying to steal dApps from EOS, and of course, there's we will compete for dApps, right? I generally think that each network will find its own niche or feel or usership, and dApps will tend to deploy based on what most closely aligns to their values or usership or whatever. But I think a really important point is that with Telos and EOS together, there's double the options for dApp developers who are not just looking at EOS or Telos at all. They are, I will tell you as one, they are looking at all the generation 2 and generation 3 blockchains. They're looking at Ethereum. Do we deploy on Ethereum? There's a big user base. There's a lot of problems. We don't know what the future is going to be. It's slower and more expensive, but it works, right? Or are we going to go on Tron, which is Ethereum with a smaller number of nodes that operates faster? It's gaining a lot of traction. Do we hold off for Cardano, which is peer-reviewed scientific blockchain and but is slow to deploy, right? All of these Gen 2 and Gen 3 blockchains have their strengths and weaknesses, and by having there be two to choose from, or soon 3 or soon 4 eventually in EOS, what we're doing is we're getting people in their development cycle to say, you know what, let's go for EOS Telos, and we'll develop them and we can deploy on either. We'll figure out a month before or we deploy, or a week before, and we'll track them along the way. But we have double the options here, or triple the options when Warbly comes in, or whatever, right? So by having more options, it makes the whole EOSIO landscape and ecosystem more attractive to developers, which they don't have on VeChain or Tron or Cardano or Neo or Ethereum, right? So maybe on Ethereum. So anyway, that is sort of the landscape that we look at. How we're going to do it, we are very, very interested in how to approach RAM. So we have two stated approaches, but we are looking at a lot of other things. We just haven't come out with them. So we feel that every approach we have is another arrow in the quiver for how we can manage RAM prices to keep it stable, right? And stability is important to the developers, and so therefore it's important to all of us on the network. So the first thing we're going to do is start with a low amount of. we have said 4 gigabytes of RAM, and in looking at the actual specifics of it, launching with just 4 gigabytes would probably be, so there's a certain amount of overhead, right? You need to start up every account with a certain amount, and 4 gigabytes would do that, but it wouldn't leave a lot of overhead for additional dApps to run. So when I say we're going to start with 4 gigabytes in the white paper, as we look at the numbers, it may be more than that. It may be 8 or 12 or something like that, but it's not going to be 64. The problem with EOS starting with 64 is that there's nowhere to go but up. And what they're doing right now is they are adding 64 more gigs over the next year, a block at a time, which seems great and is very effective right now. The problem is it's masking what's really happening. So the price stabilized when that happened, but that also correlated with a big drop in prices, especially with EOS prices. And so people who are speculators probably stopped worrying about RAM, and they were just getting out of EOS altogether so that they could, because the EOS price was dropping. And so that I think that masked how much of an effect the new approach took. There was a small thing where a week or two's worth of extra RAM was deployed because EOS doesn't have a staging testnet where new code is deployed 24 hours or more before engaging on the mainnet. That is actually another improvement that Telos has. We have a public testnet, and we also have a staging testnet where we're going to test everything and make sure it works as planned, except for critical security errors patches. But anything else, generally, so something like that, we would have tested on our staging testnet and seen that it did that, and then corrected that code first, I believe. So that's another place we were able to learn from what EOS is doing. So we are going to. So one of the things we're going to do is start low, and be able to have a lot of overhead, or a lot of additional RAM that we could release at any time. That is a negative to speculators, right? Frankly, anytime a new system like this comes out and the price goes from possibly 0 to any number, you're going to see a rush of speculation because it's starting at 0, right? You're certainly going to make money. What we can't really be judged by. I don't think it's realistic to judge by the first week of a new system, first couple weeks of a new system, because it's naturally going to reach some kind of stasis. The question is, how quickly does it reach that stasis, and how broad are the swings when it does? But back on EOS. So EOS, we're going to have a lot that we can bring out. If we only start with 8 or 10 or 12 gigabytes of RAM, or 4, that means that we have a lot more that we could release at any time. And so that kind of scares speculators, because they're playing a game of when are we going to drop the extra RAM. And I probably will have no personal say in this, but I would certainly encourage, just as a public citizen, I would encourage the people who do decide that, the block producers, to maybe do it in ways that discourage, that are maybe possibly punitive to people who aren't listening to the fact that we're saying don't over speculate on RAM. So that's one way, is starting low and having a lot more that we bring out. EOS has basically, that is the tool that EOS is using now. They have a dribbling out system of the next 64 gigs. So, but it kind of hides what's really going to happen in the future. I don't think that's actually a good solution. Aside from the fact that there was a period of a down period where speculators pulled out of the market, probably the RAM market. The bigger issue is, if you have 64 gigs and then you say over the next year we're going to add 64 gigs, then initially you're adding at an exponential rate, right? You are doubling, right? And that's going to have a big effect. But very quickly it becomes apparent that you're actually adding at an arithmetic rate, right? You're not going to double it again the next year. You're not going to, unless you change, unless you decide to do that, at which point you are starting a race that you're going to lose quickly, because it's expanding even faster than Moore's law, right? Of doubling every 18 months if you're going to double every year. So if you're just going to, at first when you start at 64 gigs and then you add 64 gigs, hey, you're doubling. But pretty soon you're just adding 64 gigs every year, and it becomes much less effective. And that is likely to coincide with the time when more and more dApps are starting to deploy on the network. So you'll get they're setting themselves up for a double whammy. But they're very, very, very smart people running EOS, and I'm sure they are aware of this, and they will approach it and fix it as it becomes, if my prediction, proves true. So we have a totally different additional tool though, which is called the published guidance price. So since we have a way to kick out, since we have a structure that has, an endowment, we have said, what if we get some smart people who are never going to trade this, and who are publicly known, and who have some good bona fides economy, and who say every 2 months put out a report and saying, first of all, what they think, publishing a price that they think that RAM actually would be at based on current network usage, and upcoming events that they recommend to the producers, right? So, and they say, here's where we think it really should be. And so this is going to be our published guidance price. And to maintain this price, we will use our endowment to purchase RAM when it's below that, to support it. Because actually, there is another case that no one's talking about yet, where what could happen is the price of EOS or Telos could skyrocket, and then RAM could actually be too cheap when denominated in EOS or Telos, right? So no one's talked about that yet. It's actually be a nice thing to happen, but if it gets too cheap, there's also problems. So it works against stability. So the Telos Foundation, RAM administration, which is a private group, it's not political. It's separated from the block producers. They can publish this price, and they can buy when it's below, and the RAM price is below, and they can sell when the RAM price is above. And they have a stated position that any real DApp developer can purchase at the published guidance price anytime that the actual market price is, say, 10% above that price. So what that does is it says to speculators, hey, speculators, the only really reason to speculate is that you think ultimately that developers are going to want to buy this, that you're sitting, this RAM that you're sitting on. If the price goes too high, we will just sell it at this other price as long as we have it, as long, we being the Telos Foundation. That actually should be quite powerful. I know that people have said, wow, that's just like a central bank. And yes, true, it does replicate one function of a central bank, but it doesn't replicate any of the other functions of a bank. And the problem with the central bank is central banks not only can do that, but they can also, set interest rates for an economy, but they can also do things like print new money, right? They have the power to print new money, and they have the power to do things like quantitative easing, where they buy up huge portions of stock, and they have the power to give special insider deals to different banks, and move money around in a bit of a shell game. The Telos Foundation can't do any of that stuff, right? So, like, setting interest rates is really not a problem, or first of all, we don't set interest rates. We suggest a price that we think would be the natural price for over that 2-month period, and based on scientific rationale, if not for market forces and speculation, right? So it's just guidance. And then and then the Telos Foundation, and I say we, whoever the Telos Foundation ultimately is, that RAM administration will seek to moderate towards that price and help stabilize the market. But it's not printing new tokens. It's not giving secret deals to anybody. It's not doing all those other things that are really objectionable about a central bank. So those are the two tools we have right now. We are looking at some other tools. One of the things we're really looking at closely, and I've never said before outside of the group, but I think it's perfectly fine to talk about as long as everyone understands that this is discussion. This is a discussion and exploratory phase, not something we publicly said that we're doing. But to give some insight into some of the things we're discussing, RAM is actually a token in EOSIO, and so we're looking at what would happen if you were able to take RAM and make it into a tradable token that would trade just like any other token, right? Where you could have, so currently there's no counterparty trading, which means I can't sell it to, Alice can't sell it to Bob, but it also means that Alice can't transfer it from one account she has to a, like that her company has bought a lot of RAM, but they have 7 different D apps and they know they're going to need it, but they don't know exactly how to allocate it. So Alice can't go send some to a different D app right now that they have that needs more because it's growing faster than the others. She can't send this RAM that she owns and has already purchased for legitimate uses without paying like the 1%, without losing 1% in the trading fee, right? But we feel that Alice or anyone should be able to send their RAM around to a different account without having to do that. And also, the banker algorithm, if you read the banker protocol, the white paper for that the EOS's use of the banker algorithm is based on, it section 6 says that they anticipate counterparty trading, right? So and that they can work very well hand in hand with that. It hasn't been implemented in EOS. I actually don't know why, because the actual goal of the banker algorithm is to always provide a counterparty in thinly traded tokens, which I don't think RAM is actually qualifies as a thinly traded token. So in doing this, I've actually been talking. We've been talking to Liquid EOS, which is affiliated with Bancor, just to get some information and they have excellent thought leadership in this space, and we want to leverage that. They have not joined Telos at this point. I don't want to suggest that they have, but in terms of an open community, we've had a lot of very productive discussions, and we hope that they will ultimately lead to a third tool in our tool chest for how to approach RAM and maybe make it a lot more useful for people. That's not an announcement. That's just something we're looking at. We're looking at a lot of things because it's important, and we feel that we best serve the Telos network and its members by having a lot of really smart ways to interact with RAM and keep it affordably priced for dApps and anyone who wants to use it for legitimate purposes outside of just speculation. Which is not to say that speculation is an illegitimate purpose, but it's a natural part of the system. It actually, if you do have just counterparty trading, it provides liquidity. It's just when it gets rampant that it becomes a problem. Frankly, if you try and clamp it down and have and eliminate all speculation, you find that systems that do that, where they're basically pegging things, tend to be fine for a while, and then they fail and they fail, they fail badly. So we don't want to create that system in Telos. Anyway, I know it's a complex discussion. It just is a complex discussion. We're trying to take it really seriously.
Okay, awesome. Now the last question that I have, I know we're getting close to the end of the first hangout here, but the last question that is more towards the average user or the people who have EOS tokens. You touched on it briefly as we started the hangout, and this has to do with the distribution of Telos. And I know you had the 40,000 cap as far as the drop goes. And I just want to know if you could briefly explain the distribution process and how that is different from EOS and what the cap is all about, just so people understand it.
Absolutely. I thank you for the chance to talk about it. So here's the thing. The whole point of this is to ensure that everyone vote that matters. When you look at systems where people feel like their vote doesn't matter, then they disengage, right? And I think that anyone who understands basic math and looks at EOS understands that as this system matures, like right now, there's smaller votes still actually matter a bit. And I'm not talking, I'm talking mathematically, right? They mathematically matter. But when we ramp up to fuller engagement and adoption, they really just don't, right? And I think that's seen in the way that some block producers are being elected. You can't sugarcoat it, right? There's 1%, less than 1% of the votes really drive all the decisions. I think that's one of the reasons why EOS doesn't trust the electorate to vote for their arbitrators, and why they're concerned about how the worker proposal system's 4% inflation is going to be delivered. Because if those things are based on votes, then then there's no reason why those wouldn't follow the same pattern that block producing voting has followed, right? So the alternative to that is, say, what if we could eliminate the hyper concentration of voting? What if we rescaled this? We touched as few accounts as possible, but we said, how do we make an actual middle class? How do we engage people so that they know that even though it's pro rata voting by how many tokens you have, it's not so extenuated that nobody but 0.67% of accounts matter. So that is what that's about. It's not at all intended to be punitive to whales. There are a lot of people who have big accounts, and they have big accounts because they believed in EOS all along. We want them to engage. I understand that it's not exciting to know that you had maybe millions of tokens on EOS, and you're going to have 40,000 tokens, 160,000 if you had 4 accounts, which is actually something we can't fix. And so we still definitely want these people to engage. We want their vote. They play an important role. But what we're trying to say is we want everyone. We want not just those people to play an important role. We believe. So here's what I deeply, deeply, deeply believe. I deeply believe that somebody who bought 1,000 EOS does not care any less about EOS and is no less passionate about EOS than someone who bought 1 million. I know that sounds crazy. I just think that the person who bought 1,000 didn't have access to buy, didn't have the means to buy 1 million. And in fact, it's very possible that 1,000 EOS that they purchased could represent a much bigger proportion of their disposable or investment income than the 1 million EOS for the other person. Much of this is conjecture, but I'm sure that if across the token ownership, that is true for some sets of people. They don't care less. They just don't. In fact, they may care very deeply. Why? We don't want to disengage the people who had 1 million or 10 million or 100 million EOS. We want them engaged That's why we didn't knock it out. That's why we went as we kept as high a number as we possibly could. We want those people engaged and rewarded and have a big voice in Telos. But we also want the people who maybe made EOS their biggest, and EOSIO their biggest financial investment because they so deeply care about it, to also have a vote, right? I know people who put all their basically put all their money on EOS because they believe in it, they care about it, they know it's going to change the world. And I think those people are just as much an asset to the community as the people who put in 10 million over the life of the project. So I want those people, I want everyone to have a vote that means something. That's what it's about. In technical terms, if anyone who exists on the EOS snapshot will be on the Telos snapshot. The changes are, we are setting aside 6 million tokens for the Telos Foundation, manage for initial grants and managing RAM and things like that, and promoting the network, right? So that's buying ads and hiring people to be social media and hiring people to do onboarding for new dApps that have come in. There's 6 million for that is going to be shared by all the currently over 90 contributors, and I think by the time we launch, it'll be well over 100 contributors. About 2/3 of those, I believe, are with block producer groups, and the remaining third are just citizens who care very deeply and are not affiliated and have no intention to become block producers on Telos. So those will be split up in a really what I think is going to be a model for all future projects of sort of the BitShares slices model 2.0 that Rob Konsdorf of EOS Detroit and James Davis of GoodBlock and two professional compensation experts have come in and figured out ways the most fair ways to do this. So that's 6 million, which is less than 1.8% of the total expected token supply, and then 1 million accounts that's dedicated to community members who are out tweeting and making videos and spreading the word so that we can get as many people excited about the Telos launch and activation as possible. So we start with it. We start with a snapshot. We add those 3 accounts. We correct we rekey anyone who has lost their keys and can prove it cryptographically, and that's how we're going to launch. It is a little bit heartbreaking. The one thing I regret the most about how we're doing this is the fact that people who have bought EOS since the snapshot are not included. We have to pick a method. Any one method we pick risks or certainly will leave some people behind. So knowing that, we're trying to pick the method that best launches the network, and that method is this initial snapshot. I know that that snapshot's getting a little long in the tooth. I regret it. The things that using that initial snapshot do for us are, number one, it ensures that people who have more than 40,000 accounts in a token 40,000 tokens in an account can't just split those up into a number of accounts and circumvent the tokenomics fix we're trying to do. That's a big reason. Also, we believe that all exchanges that held EOS as of the EOS snapshot will have a recorded snapshot as of that time, which makes it much easier for us to include those exchanges and the token holders who were EOS token holders of record at that time in EOS. And it also makes it possible for us much easier to rekey people who had their accounts phished or spoofed or stolen or whatever early on due to the fact that there were inadequate voting tools for people to use. So those are the reasons that we decided to stick with the original ERC 20 June 1st, June 2nd, 2018 snapshot. We know it doesn't make everybody happy. What we hope is that people will come in early if they believe in it, purchase tokens, or just we're giving away a lot of tokens. So maybe those people who really believe in EOS and want to engage in Telos but don't want to put out a lot of new money because you can't even do that yet, will put out some effort and then earn tokens through our community reward system. That's sort of a way also of re-engaging those people. Anyway, that's how the tokens will be distributed.
Yeah, it's great, and that's a great way even to end the first Hangout on a positive note with a lot of stuff. Because I know when you touched on the point about the smaller account holders, I know from where I'm coming from with the EOS Talk community, the majority of our members and the people that are with us are 1,500 EOS or less, and majority are under 500. But they are, as you said, just as passionate about EOS and what it brings as far as dApps in the future and stuff as anyone else who has the larger holders. So it's great.
Yeah, I mean, if we leave, look, we don't want to leave anyone behind, right? We don't want to leave. If we were really communist or trying to punish whales, we could have just deleted those accounts. We did not want to do that, and we did not want to bring them down to some number that didn't honor their original contribution to EOSIO. But we definitely don't want to leave behind those people you're talking about who have, an average of 1,500 EOS, really care about it, are probably the future, are probably the people who have ideas about dApps, who are going to get together and run proxies or become arbitrators or write tutorials or do all this other work that's really ultimately going to or advocate, right, and evangelize. Those are the people we need just as much as the super large token holders. We need everybody. It's all about, and I really want to be clear about this, it's all about keeping everyone in the family and not having those people like you're talking about become disenfranchised because no matter how much they love EOS, their vote doesn't really swing anything. And I think if you look at real world voting systems, when people feel that disenfranchisement, they disengage.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, right now, as you're talking about this, I am showing the Telos page about the rewards and stuff. Just people know how they can help and contribute with tweets or content like you were just talking about.
Yeah, here's I will reveal personally that I think we're giving way too much. I have no problem with this. I'm happy that we're doing it. I think we allocated probably more than the ideal amount. But it was voted on. Telos truly is decentralized. So I, as white paper author and a pretty significant contributor, I don't have thumbs up approval on anything, which is exactly how it should be. The rest of the voters decided, and when in their wisdom, which I think they probably are, I think they had a good point. Let's make it a large amount so that we bring in as many people as possible. We'll give them new accounts. This is a chance that people can earn. We put a cap of 10,000, right? So somebody who's out making videos on YouTube and making some tutorial videos, which are double, right? And that are getting a lot of hits, those people could walk away with 10,000 Telos, and under our current proposal, 2 voting tokens in the Telos Foundation, right? Because we're proposing opening that up to everyone who participates, right? Now you don't just have to be a inside contributor. We are trying to engage people who have made large contributions in the community rewards. I hope that's adopted. It's not yet. It's not an announcement. It's what's proposed in the group, and we'll be pushing that out, that document out soon if we haven't already. But it's a lot. There's a lot up for grabs. I think people who fully engage with that and get a bunch are going to look back in a year or two and go, oh man, thank God I did that, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk about Telos. It's starting to spread even in some of our own communities with EOS Talk and Wellshare. So people are getting the word out, and more people are starting to ask questions. What is it? What is it? What's the difference? That's why even I came to you and say let's get these hangouts rolling because people are asking
Yes,
questions. So it's definitely a good way to get the word out.
absolutely. And I notice in the chat here there is a question from MS Cav fan. And I would hate to not answer a question that somebody's asked. Do we have time to address that real quick?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so the question is, if Telos were at $1 per share, on average, what would a block producer, top 21, earn in a year? Could they end up becoming whales based on what they earn over a few years? So I don't have the math in front of me, but here's what I know. Here's how the math works. 1% inflation per year is dedicated to Telos, to block producers. So if we have a money supply that's 330 million tokens, then that would be 3.3 million tokens per year. Telos tokens. So that would be $3.3 million at $1. And that is shared over the entire year between 51 block producers. And that group, people rotate in and out and also rotate positions within that group. But 51, so it's a bigger group, but let's just look at it as if it were those 51. So at $1 per Telos, and 330 million tokens, which we haven't gotten to yet. We need to get to that. We need to have more exchanges come on board. We actually think that will happen very soon. It's just hard for them to actually do it before they see the network is live, right? Frankly, there's no way to engage with it. So we're laying groundwork for that. So we think that will happen. So let's use that number. 330 million token supply means 3.3 million Telos are shared by a group of 51, right? That has some fluidity to it. 21 of that 51 will all receive the same pay, and 30 will receive half that rate of pay. So what that comes to is 72 shares. So somebody get the calculator. I have one. So if there's 3.3 million tokens at $1 per token, divided, but let's just say for argument's sake that all of those token holders are that all of those token holders are or all those block producers stay the same over that time. So doing a little math here. So that means that a standby who had been a standby all year under those conditions would earn 45,833 Telos tokens at $1 a piece. That's a year. That's almost $46,000 for their service as a standby that year, and double. And somebody who had been a full-time top 21 would earn 91,666.6 Telos over the whole year, which would be 91,000. So that would be at $1 a pop. So that means they would be making $7,638 per day. And if we divide by 30, let's say, they would make about $254.63 a day at $1. That's the economics. I'm actually really glad that got asked. I was curious what that would be. I personally think, and I don't like talking about price, but I think the thing to remember is that and so but you can look at that as 254.6263 Telos tokens a day for being a block producer. So I personally think that if you look at Telos and we do what we're intending to do and have a network that's at least as good as EOS, and where each token is actually worth 3 to 4 times as much when measured in network resources, then I think that the cost of a Telos token should, in short time, be closer to the cost of an EOS token. I certainly would do everything I could to not sell any Telos tokens at $1. if Good Block is elected as a block producer, I wouldn't want to do that. I would be kicking myself down the road if I did that. Anyway, I think that's the best I can answer. Does that answer your question, MS Cavs fan? Okay, great. I guess we did it. Thanks. That was actually a great question, and I'm sorry I stumbled through the math of that, but I'm glad we talked about it. It's kind of cool. So we've been on for an hour and 20 minutes. I don't see any other questions. This is a good time to wrap up the first one. What do you think?
Sounds good. I think we had a great show and covered a lot of good topics to get people started.
Thank you. I'm really excited. Thanks so much for setting this up. I know I took a little bit of prodding to be able to get my schedule together for us, but I'm really excited to be here. I hope this continues, and I appreciate all the work you put into setting it up and the audience that you're bringing to it and everyone's participation.
Absolutely, and we'll do this every Wednesday and kind of get us through that go no go on the 28th.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and look, when we launch, I mean, I would love it to be the 28th. I hope it is. We're going to know ahead of time, right? What we really want to look at is turning red circles and yellow dots into green check marks, and we're doing this. We've learned the lesson that we don't want to launch too early. I would love it to be the 28th, but everyone's going to know where we are on that. It's not going to come as a surprise. Anyway, that's what I think, and I can't wait. Thanks, everybody.